Jayodhira Nishta Presho Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevya Bhagavati Utamashaki Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Nigama Kapadur Garitam Param Shukama Karamita Jabi Samitam Pibata Bhagatam Rasamarayam Maharu Biri Birikam Nigama Kapadur Garitam Param Shukama Karamita Jabi Samitam Pibata Bhagatam Rasamarayam Maharu Biri Samisa Parana Kodinoditam Tamapiyadavashuta Vishutam Vivu Samapyadana Vidam Viduksaram Prakyahiduho Mahoradi Tamaram Sankleshanavanam Usandi Tanyatam Chakvasaranam Charalam Bhushamara Bhajana Pakpatavya Yatrakava Bada Buddha Mutite Kovartatam Bhajatam Shadarmataham Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Jayatam Surido Pango Mammadermatergati Matsavasha Paramboja Radhana Madana Mohanam Sriman Rasarasaram Vivam Savila Karsan Venershan Upaka Gopanata Sri Esram Divyad Brindaranya Kapadrumada Srimad Radnagara Shima Shanishto Sri Sirada Shida Gopinadeva Presta Lavihi Seva Manushmanami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Taya Chajigati Taya Krishnaya Gopinaya Namo Namaha Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Gudaraja Mangalam Padikaksho Manganayatanohi Om Narayana Vidmahi Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishnu Prachodayate Om Mahadevi Vidmahi Vishnu Padichamhi Tanno Lakshmi Prachodayate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Sade Sade Hari Priya Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Dhyarade Tapta Kanchana Gonagir Hari Vindavaneshwari Vishavanasute Divi Pranamani Hari Priya Nama Om Vishnu Panaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Dhiramane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sanyavadi Praskita Desadhari Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Good morning, Carmen. Good morning, Brent. Good morning, Jean. Haven't had a request from Rob this morning from the waiting room. He may be tied up with something else. Had an interesting, just share with you. I think I mentioned this before, but a schoolmate named Bruce Smith, who was part of the class of 1964 from Lawrenceville, New Jersey, a graduating class of the prep school I went to. And I remember him. There were about 100 in our class. I remember he's a quiet boy, tall. He's very tall now. He's about 6'5". He'd gotten in touch with me. You know, he lived, had a business in Alabama, had another business in Kentucky, but eventually his grandchildren were living in Utah, and he'd converted to Mormonism. So he ended up here with his wife, Deborah. Came by to see me. We had a nice lunch together, and he said, I want to come to one of your Sunday services. So he'd sent me an email Saturday. I said, I'm going to bring my wife. He came, his wife. He's very tall. His wife's very short. Very nice lady. Very nice lady. Very self-possessed. Very powerful lady. They enjoyed the Sunday program like anything. He said he even took notes. The funny thing was, the reason I mentioned that, all that you've heard before, but what you haven't heard before is somewhere he got a hold of a video from 1964. The day we graduated, and so we're all standing around with our suits and ties on, young. What were we? 18 years old. Parents had come in, relatives had come in for the graduating service. And I think the video was taken by my roommate, Charles Whitehead, because he had purchased a hearse. He spoke Spanish. In fact, today he teaches Spanish in a Quaker school in Philadelphia. So he had intended after graduation to go to Latin America. And he chose a hearse, a secondhand hearse, as his means of transportation, which ended up being a pretty good choice, because he said they were never bothered anywhere they went, Central or South, and nobody ever bothered them because they didn't want to risk the bad juju from vandalizing or robbing from people that were in a hearse. But the hearse plays very prominently in the video. he and I, apparently a few days prior to the graduation, we're throwing a baseball. We were both on the baseball team. We're there in our Lawrenceville uniforms, tossing a baseball back and forth. And then there's another shot. So I think I'd come in at 421 and 533. Anyway, I may share that with you. It's a real hoot, you know, to go back that far in time, that there'd be a video out there existing with, and you know, when I think back, I mean, we're you know, it was a good bunch of young men, all from privileged families, very very well to do, but with integrity, with character. It's a part of my life that, you know, getting into Krishna consciousness, I never thought I'd circle back again, and I didn't really do the closing of the circle myself. It just happened through the intercession of Bruce. But I'm glad it did. I'm glad it did. And he's here living in Utah. And we got back in touch, and through him, some of the other kids in my class, no longer kids, have gotten in touch with me. And then this video comes to light, which was just extraordinary. Maybe one day I'll screen share it with you. I think you'll get a kick out of it. This is Transcendental Tuesday. Rob just joined us here. Thank you for that, Rob. We're missing you. Carmen's here today. Carmen, I don't know if you know it, but yesterday we had some really nice poetry from Brent. And Natasha made a wonderfully rhythmic offering. Later on, she told me she uses AI for her poetry. She uses the assistance of AI. Be that as it may, we ended up yesterday about how it takes humility to see the stories of the Bhagavatam, the stories of the Puranas, with an ever fresh eye. One should never be of the mindset, oh, I know this story, I know these details, I know these pastimes. We find that quite common with Indian people. You know, you start to refer to the Bhagavad Gita, you start to refer to the Bhagavatam, you can almost see their eyes roll up in their head, and they get this 1,000-yard stare, and they just switch off. There's just a switch, it just switches off. From their point of view, your mouth is moving, but no sound is coming out, and certainly nothing is entering their ears. There's so many Indian. And then we go ahead and say, yes, I know, I come from there. I come from there. And it's true. In India, less perhaps so in the modern day, but going back, well, I mean, to a significant degree even today, but you know, the further go back, the more the Krishna culture was evident everywhere you turn. You know, if you were born in an Indian family, you became familiar with the stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Your grandfather told them to you. The most popular TV series of all time were episodic versions of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. It said you could walk down any street in India in the 80s when Raman Sargar came out with his version of the Mahabharata. Said you could walk down any street in India, and through the windows and from the radio stations and TV, you would hear, when that 1 hour a week of the Mahabharata was coming by, you would hear unbroken. You could walk down the street and you wouldn't miss anything. You wouldn't miss anything. You would never be out of earshot of at least one or two TVs broadcasting the stories of the stores, Radhika Jewelers, Krishna Travels, you know, Govinda Groceries. It's true. Almost everywhere you turn in India, and this was more the case the further back in time you go, you'll be reminded of Krishna. But the problem is without humility, the problem is without seeing these stories as the lotus feet of Krishna and metaphorically bowing down and putting your head at the feet of these stories, opening the books with reverence, going back to them repeatedly, reading them consistently, trying to understand them through the eyes and through the narrations and commentaries of great realized saintly devotees like Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Baladev Vidyabhushan, Vishwanath Chakravarti. They've sifted through the sands and discussed and churned and relished these pastimes throughout hundreds and even thousands of years, going back to Sukadeva Goswami, Maharaj Parikshit, Prahlad Maharaj, and Sringadev. There's nothing new about the topics of the Bhagavatam, and there's nothing stale. But if you lack humility, if you have not received the knowledge in the company of great, exalted, purified devotees, you'll take it for granted. You'll say, yes, I come from there. I know that. Oftentimes it's so funny. Someone you start talking about the Gita and they'll say, yes, my favorite verse in the Bhagavad Gita is where Krishna says to Arjuna, do whatever you want. Krishna says, after having explained the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita about the soul, about duty, about the supreme soul, yeah, then do what you want, because I'm not going to interfere with your free will. I created you with free will, and I'm not going to force you. But the Supreme Personality of God, it just came all the way from the spiritual world to appear on this earth planet to create the dramatic circumstances of the conflict between the Kauravas and the Karu, and the result of which is Arjuna appears in the middle of them on his chariot, sees his relatives, friends, and teachers, and loses heart and gets confused, after which Krishna clarifies the issue, purifies the waters, brings focus with the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita, advising, not telling, not forcing. God knocks at the door. He doesn't kick the door down, because the choice is ours. We have to do our part. After explaining to Arjuna the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita, then he says, do what you will. But this Indian person will say, yeah, the whole purpose, the whole Bhagavad Gita, 800 verses, the whole descent of the Lord from the spiritual world, the whole narrative of the Mahabharata, which is 10 times longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey, it all boils down to do what you want to do. Yeah, sure. Prabhupada talked about in Vienna. Vienna's, as far as Europe is concerned, if you want to learn music, you go to Vienna. The best music teachers in the world are in Vienna. However, those music teachers, they have a peculiarity. If you apply to be their student, they ask on the questionnaire, have you studied music before? If the answer is yes, they charge twice as much. That doesn't seem to make sense. If someone's learned music, you'd think that you could skip, certain preliminaries and pick up down the road. You save some time. But the experienced music teachers double their fees if people admit on the application form that they've studied music before. And the reason they do that is because they have to unlearn them all the half-truths and misconceptions and bad practices and patterns of behavior that they have inevitably picked up from lesser teachers, from hacks. So they have to spend twice as much time with the ones that have had music lessons before than if they're starting out fresh from scratch. And this is the case with many people from India. It's much less true because many educated Indian people have stepped up to the plate. They've assumed responsibility for their spiritual lives. Many of the management positions, there are 600-700 ISKCON temples all over the world now. And many of the management positions, even in America, the majority of temples are now headed up, even in Trinidad, even in South America, wherever there's an Indian diaspora, the Indians have stepped up and they are very active, they're very educated, they're very articulate in spreading Sanatana Dharma. At first, they were negligent. They thought it was just an Indian thing, and it hasn't stood us in good stead, because look what happened with the Mughals. Look what happened with the British. So we're going to imitate the Americans. This was the mood in the 70s and 80s. But when Prabhupada established a foothold, when he interested young, privileged Westerners, like I said, I went to Lawrenceville, which is one of the prestigious prep schools in America. My classmates were Chip DuPont from the DuPont company, the DuPont friend. Clint Murchison's family owned the Dallas Cowboys. We had a classmate named Turkey Faisal. He was the son of the king of Saudi Arabia. And yet and I know at least 3 other classmates from Lawrenceville that are Krishna devotees. Disha in Tallahassee and a couple of others. And also, it's funny too, because within our movement, the grandson of Henry IV, he's been a devotee for 40 years. He was initiated by Prabhupada as Ambarish Das. And he bought the Detroit Temple for the devotees. It was a former mansion of Lawrence Fisher, the founder of Cadillac Motors. When it came up for sale, he bought it. That's presently the Detroit Temple. But his magnum opus, his greatest achievement within the Krishna conscious movement, is the soon-to-be open Temple of Vedic Understanding in Mayapur, West Bengal, our headquarters, about 90 kilometers north of Calcutta. It's a $50 million project, at least $30 million of which he's donated the funds, and he is the supervisor, he is the manager of the whole project. Well, I haven't met him personally, never had the good fortune, but he sent me a message through Facebook a few years ago. He said, "You went to Lawrenceville, I went to Hill." Lawrenceville and Hill were huge rivals, just like you have BYU and University of Utah. So on the East Coast, you have Andover, Exeter, and you have Lawrenceville and Hill. Hockey, basketball, baseball. You get huge crowds of partisans cheering on the respective sides, huge rivals. So with tongue in cheek, Ambarish sent me a little message. "Oh, you went to Lawrenceville, I went to Hill. I guess we're on the same side now." Krishna consciousness has that ability to remove the fences, the distinctions, and rally all kinds of people of all different backgrounds and all different births and ethnicities and genders, has the ability to rally people under the banner of Krishna consciousness. Sarva pari vinirmuktam tvatpapena rishikesha rishikera bhaktirutama. First thing you have to know about Krishna consciousness culture is you're not the body. There are all kinds of different bodies and genders and nationalities and economic statuses. We sweep all of that aside, and we see ourselves as spirit souls, all related sons and daughters of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that has to be, if not anything else, humbling, with a humble state of mind and with the proper training, and not having gotten misconceptions, wrong patterns of thinking, mundane misapprehensions about the pastimes of Krishna as described in the Bhagavatam and the Puranas. Getting the right knowledge, evam para para praptim, the knowledge is actually meant to be passed down to the recipient through the bona fide chain of succession, from spiritual master to disciple, beginning with Krishna, coming down through the ages, unchanged, unedited, unaltered. It can be amplified, certainly. It could, you can take the details and amplify on them, but not change them, not edit. Prabhupada once said, there were gurus that came to America, and some of them would do magic tricks. Some of them would produce a little bit of ashes, or someone would produce some gold, or someone would give an apple, and people would take the apple and they go down the road, and 5 miles away, they see all of a sudden there's an Om that appears on the apple. He said, "I haven't done any magic tricks." He said, people said to Prabhupada, "Swami, you've done miracle." All these Westerners, they're now mad after the Indian culture, and because of the lead that the Westerners took, being prompted and wound up and trained by Prabhupada, now we're seeing the best and brightest, the cream of all the Indian crop is now fully supporting and fully participating in Krishna conscious movement. Nevertheless, Prabhupada said, my only credit is not some sleight of hand or some magic trick. My only credit is I took the knowledge, the standard knowledge spoken by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, the stories spoken about Krishna by none other than Veda Vyas, the literary incarnation of passed down to his son Sukadeva Goswami, narrated Parikshit, then from Sudha Goswami to Sanaka Rishi, and down through there, he said, I have not changed anything. My credit is that what potency was there has come down through the ages, and it has jumped from India to America through the agency of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And the proof of that potency is that young boys and girls who were previously addicted to illicit sex, promiscuity, LSD, pot, and eating meat have now given all of that up, and now they're pursuing the innate feature of love of God. They're nourishing the seed of love of God within their hearts. One Christian priest, he said, I can't understand it. These are our boys and girls. From the time they were toddlers, they went to our churches, Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist. They got everything that we had to give them, all the Bible lessons, all the teaching, all the sermon, all the Sunday schools. And after all of that, they were not particularly interested or convinced about God. And this Swami comes from India, penniless Swami in ill health. But because he didn't change anything, he carried the full potency of the words of Krishna without adding anything or subtracting anything. The priest said, now these were our boys and girls, but now they're mad after God. They're from a level of indifference. Now they're mad after God. Prabhupada compared himself to a postman. Postman just delivers the letter. He doesn't steam it open, read it, edit it, add something, subtract something. He doesn't black anything out. He just delivers the letter. Manmana, Pavamadbhakta, Majagi, Mamna, Mame Basiti, Pratijana Prayash is a 4-point program for freeing yourself of ignorance and misery and suffering and making yourself eligible to go back to home, back to Godhead. 4 points, very simply. Manmana, think of Krishna. Mad Bhakta, become a devotee. Manmana Majagi Mam Namaskuru, offer me obeisances and bow down and worship me. Think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and offer obeisances. This is the message in its simplicity. And if you come in that line, then you'll never tire of hearing the stories of the Bhagavatam. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. 24 hours a day, in fact, one can hear the Bhagavatam and never get bored, never think of it as stale. But one has to have the prerequisite of humility. The proof that we actually know a pastime is not that we can recite the elements of the plot, not that we've memorized verses, not that we know the details, not that we're familiar with the storyline. None of those are proofs that we're actually knowers of the Bhagavatam. The proof that we've actually grasped the essence of a certain pastime in the Bhagavatam, like the story of Gajendra, which we've been discussing for over 60 sessions now, is that we've had a cleansing of the heart. We've had a heart transplant, a transformative experience. And when the heart gets cleansed, when the crud is wiped off of the mirror of the heart, desire arises. Gajendra pastime, 60 sessions, extending out over, like, what, 6 months? Oh, I've had enough. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to a fresh pastime. Let's go to Prahlad. Let's go to Dhruva Maharaj. And we will go to Prahlad, And we will do it, but can I tell you, we haven't even begun to squeeze all the juice out of Gajendra Lila that's there. We haven't even begun, we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg after 60 sessions. When we started hearing about Gajendra 6 months ago, let's say our consciousness was at 5 units, And then after several more sessions, let's then say our consciousness came to 10 units. So we became, in effect, a different category of person. The result of hearing the pastimes from the authorized source has brought about a transformation in ourselves, in our personality, in our character. So when we revisit that pastime, even after as short a time as 24 hours, we are no longer the same person we were before. We have more units of understanding, more units of character, more units of purity. So the symptom that there's been a lift in our consciousness is that we want to hear that pastime again and again and again. And if you're reluctant to hear that pastime again, if you're in a mood of avoidance, then it's to be understood. You need to take inventory that you're not getting benefit. Your heart is not getting purified. You're holding on to pride. You're holding on to envy. You're holding on to arrogance. You're holding on to something. There's a log jam there that's preventing you from enjoying the flow, just like the Ganges flows inexorably and inevitably downward, downward, downward. The force, tremendous force of the Ganges goes from the Himalayan heights, thousands and thousands of feet above sea level, and it rushes with unstoppable force to sea level at the Bay of Bengal. Similarly, if that force to hear, that freshness is not coursing through your body, it's to be understood that you haven't taken much care in your chanting of Hare Krishna, in your eating only food which is offered to Krishna, associating with devotees. Now, in this series of verses that we're in the midst of right now, we find a very important word, Daiva. Daiva. Daiva means literally higher power. So there are two interpretations that we receive from the great commentaries like Baladev Vidyabhushan, Vishnu Chakravarti, of Gajendra's present circumstances. He's in a bad way. Crocodiles grabbed his leg. He's being pulled into the water. The water is not his natural environment. It's not the medium in which he's at his best, just the opposite. We learn in the course of this 8th canto description of Gajendra Lila that the battle went on for 1,000 years. So time was not on Gajendra's side. Originally, there's no animal that can prey on an elephant as long as the elephant's on land. But he found himself vulnerable. He let his guard down. He ignored the fact that this material world is full of danger at every step. He got caught up in thinking of himself as the protector, the buffer for his family and his children against any dangers that are inherent there in material nature. And he paid the price. He's in an alien environment. And as time goes by, 1,000 years by the calculation of the demigods, he's losing the fight to save his life. Now, this all comes about ostensibly. Initially, we hear about his previous life when he was king in Udumna, and he committed an offense to the sage Agastya Muni. It wasn't really an offense, but the sage perceived it that way. And the sage cursed him that because you don't receive me with sensitivity and compassion, I'll curse you to take your next birth as a dull elephant. So that's the stated reason for why it was that a great king, great devotee from a previous life, took his current birth as an elephant. But there's always the remote reason. Besides the immediate cause, there's always the remote cause. And Daiva means we need to recognize not only the circumstances from our karma, not only how our past life has played a role. The seeds that we sown in our past life, both good and bad, reach fruition in this life. Tasyaiva prayate kobido nalabyate yat talabyate dukavanya kalena sarvata gavhira ramasha. Sukadeva Goswami says in the first canto of the Bhagavatam that just like we don't try for suffering, no one prays. You don't get down on your knees the night before you go to bed to say your prayers and ask for a broken leg at soccer practice the following day. You don't ask that recent visit to the doctors, the tests come back positive for cancer. No one asks for suffering, and yet it comes. Again, we're all very much aware of the situation in the Middle East. The Israeli state has, since 1946, it's been going on. It's been developing itself. It's in many ways, it's brilliant. In many ways, it's the only bastion of human rights, of women's rights, of due process of law. All of the elements of liberalism are championed in Israel. And in fact, if you go through the history of the Jewish people, practically we wouldn't have a lot of the benefits and the privileges that we enjoy in the Western countries were it not for the Jewish people. They're simply brilliant. And they've always been liberal. They've always been compassionate. They've always championed rights and fought against tyranny and oppression wherever they've been. In fact, if you look at all the 23 countries in the Middle East, 22 of which are Arab, the only one in which people have the right for self-determination, in which the government or the powers of be cannot oppress them, is Israel. It's like a beacon in the Middle East, and it just seemed, prior to October 7th, there was a treaty in the making with Saudi Arabia. They had diplomatic relations with Egypt. There was a thawing. The whole extremist mood of eradicating Israel and from the river to the sea was in danger of evaporating. And Hamas saw that. So they did this barbaric intrusion and courage, and it was just unspeakable, the horrors and atrocities they perpetuated on the people there. So this is in the material world, there's never security. No matter what you do, no matter how you champion human rights, no matter how brilliant your scientists, your literatures, your philosophers, your warriors are, still this material world, everything is based on shifting sands. Nothing is guaranteed. However many assets Gajendra had, practically speaking, you could sit down and think, if you were the enemy of Gajendra, you could rack your brain. You could have charts and graphs. How can I get to this elephant? How can I penetrate his apparent invulnerability? And you wouldn't be able to come up with anything. He was almost ironclad, strongest, biggest, smartest. It was he himself who got overconfident. It was he himself who got into the water, even though he knew he shouldn't do it. His wives wouldn't do it. His kids wouldn't do it. They saw the danger, but he became overconfident. So just at that point, Krishna intervened in the form of the crocodile. Now, it's interesting that at no point does Sukadeva Goswami say the crocodile bit the leg of Gajendra, bit the fort of Gajendra. Of course, that's what happened. There was bleeding, there was pain, there was some gore, and yet nowhere does Sukadeva Goswami use any of those words. He's basically saying that the crocodile placed himself at the feet of Gajendra. Gajendra is a great devotee, and the circumstances of his being latched onto by the crocodile, pulled into the water, and his life threatened are ultimately exactly arranged by the Lord, who is completely in control of every circumstance of our life. The crocodile is not the enemy of the elephant. Sure, he was piqued. He was peeved. Who is this guy splashing around, coming into my home, showing off before his wife and children, created disturbance? Sure, he was peeved. But nowhere does it say that he actually bit the foot of Gajendra, although that's what happened. He placed himself at the feet of Gajendra. So this indicates the remote cause of the Lord. The crocodile is doing service. Crocodile is an instrument of God who is the remote cause. Gajendra, although the storyline is that, he cursed the sage and he got cursed, and that's his karma. There's more to it than that. He's actually a great devotee of the Lord. And everything that he's going through right now is meant to instruct us never to get overconfident. When you start taking things for granted, your strength, your power, your influence, that's when Krishna is going to give you a wake-up call. We're being warned. We're being warned. So many people are in France now of Muslim extraction. So many people are in England. People are getting up and saying that what happened in Israel on October 7th could happen in London. It could happen in France. We've gotten so overconfident, so smug with our power and our influence, and yet Krishna is showing us how utterly fragile all of that is. At the very moment when Gajendra thought nothing could touch him, he let down his guard and he walked into the water. That's the moment that Krishna chose to bring him to awareness. Samsita ye plada plavaram mahatpunyam parasham pavambadiya vatsan param param yadvi param terasham. Krishna is saying, no, this material world is not safe. This material world is not meant for your comfort. This material world is here for one purpose and one purpose only. Not for economic development, not for eroticism, not for sense gratification. There's only one activity which is going to give you a benefit. There's only one win that you can achieve in this material world, and that is that if you become more or less indifferent to girding yourself, protecting yourself materially, because just as distress comes without our wanting it, happiness will also come without our wanting it. Distress and happiness are in the hands of the Lord. The best policy is not to strive for material sense gratification, not to strive for invulnerability, not to strive for security, because it's not available in this material world. Those are illusions, those are names, those are words only. The fact is there is danger at every single step. And we're being shown this so unequivocally and so graphically, just as the crocodile was the means that Krishna used to show Gajendra of the uselessness and the frailty of all material conditions. It may also be that Krishna is using the hummus to show us how really frail and fragile are all the premises under which we strut confidently in the Western culture. It's also interesting to note that as he narrates this story to Maharaj Parikshit, Sukadeva Goswami, the expert storyteller. Now, a storyteller has to ensure that he always has the interests of his audience. He knows all the signs. Every September in Utah, the Ashtons were pioneers in the early development of software. They formed originally WordPerfect, which later on I think became Microsoft Word, Excel, and they're obviously very fabulously wealthy. They established an entire 400-acre complex north of here called Thanksgiving Point, which is an amazing resource. They have the butterfly biosphere, they have the tulip festival, so many different things. Now, what was my point? They oh, I just lost it. They sponsor every September a world-class storytelling festival. They pay for it. They sponsor it. They bring some of the best storytellers in from all over the world. They have a park up in Provo Canyon, and it's quite a big event. It goes for a weekend, sometime around Labor Day, September. It's called the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. You can Google it. So any storyteller knows how to read the signs of the audience when he's starting to lose them. They're getting a little distracted. They're glancing at their cell phone or looking around. So what he has to do is reach out to them in a personal way. So Sukadeva Goswami, in order to make sure he has the full attention of Maharaj Parikshit, that he's not losing him, he calls him Nripa. Nripa means one who protects, one who protects. As a king, the main feature, the main personality trait that one has who is a king, if he's rightly situated, is he can't stand by to see others taken advantage of. He can't stand by to see others in danger. He has to intervene. He has to step in. So by telling this story and underlining the vulnerability, the sudden reversal of fortune of Gajendra. Gajendra goes from being king of the jungle, king of the forest, to being pitiful, really. He's 1,000 years have gone by. He's weak. He's lost weight. He's got circles under his eyes. He's scared. He's terrified. So the king naturally feels empathy. That's what a king does. Nobody in his kingdom suffers without his feeling empathy. Now consider Hamas. We use Hamas for a different illustration. They don't care about the Palestinians. They only care about their own agenda of hatred and resentment, and they'll use the Palestinians, they'll use the hospitals and the schools as a shelter in order to save their miserable hides. So this means they're not truly of the ruling class. They're not truly qualified to be governors. They're more like blood-sucking parasites who feed off of and exploit the citizenry, rather than those who have a natural reflexive response, that wherever people are being taken advantage of, wherever the weak are being oppressed by the strong, he who is actually a ruler, actually king, cannot stand by. He must throw himself into the breach. Sukadeva Goswami is telling the story about this progressively more and more weakened, debilitated, scared, frightened, pathetic, terrified elephant. And you can imagine Parikshit is like, he's ready to go. It's got all of its juices flowing. And then Sukadeva Goswami says, yes, Nripa, you are Nripa. He acknowledges. He says, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're thinking, because that's who you are. And God is the same way. Recognize, I'm making this point, Sukadeva Goswami, that God feels the same way. Just like you're feeling right now, you're on the edge of the seat, you're ready to jump in. Sometimes you see a movie and the movie is so compelling and so engrossing, you just want to jump up in your seat and dive into the screen. So Parikshit is like that. He's so much there. He's so much into it, because that's who he is. He's a king. He's a protector. He will not stand by idly while innocent people, the weak, are victimized by the strong. And Krishna's that. We get that impulse from Krishna, our Heavenly Father. We're parts of the Lord. We're same with him in quality. So if Parikshit is there sitting on the edge of a seat, ready to pull his sword and do something, imagine Krishna. Imagine Krishna. He's also poised now. When Gajendra comes to the end of his rope, and he can no longer rely on the other elephants to help him, he can no longer rely on his own strength. What's my song? Let me recall the words of my song. At the end of his fabled strength, devoid of his fabled strength, at the end of his rope's length, Gajendra's hopes turned to the Lord, who awards protection for his devotees. He stopped pulling on his leg, which the crocodile wanted to devour, and he plucked with his trunk from the muck of the lake a lotus and offered it, seeking the Lord's power. Krishna, you're the root of creation, the fruit of the Vedas, the absolute truth, the pleasant flute, the ever-existing youth. Your lotus feet are adored by Lord Brahma, and Shiva will not leave you even for a moment. Your features are unlimited. You're the ingredient of all creatures, whether they have hands, claws, jaws, or paws. They're all your parts and parcels. Those who are smart engage in your devotional service with all their hearts. You guard those who never depart from the hearth of your loving breast. Lord, I confess that I've messed up, failed the test, repressed my service, but I'm thirsty for your mercy, which is greater than all my mistakes. I've heard that all it takes to awaken your protection is a single cry of helpless affection. Lord, in spite of my shame, in the middle of the fight, I'm calling your name. Please reclaim me from the might of the crocodile's bite. Release me from the teeth of the croc. Block ignorance from my life. Lock me into devotional service. Lord, let my purpose rise once again to the surface. I'm knocking at your door. Please keep me close from now till evermore. So just like Parikshit is ready to jump in, Krishna does in fact at this very moment jump in when Gajendra calls out in helpless affection. It is said, hearing the eloquent prayers of the elephant, the Lord steered Garuda to the spot and sheared the crocodile's head from his body with his chakra. When the reptile lay dead and Gajendra was shed of his dread, he resumed the thread of his prayers and said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bo. Oh my gosh, we got Chad into it now. we are the live, we're not the Dead Poet Society, we're the Live Poet Society. Carmen, thanks for rejoining us this morning. Hare Krishna. Brett, Jean, Chad, Natasha. Chasha sent along a wonderfully generous, kind donation yesterday. Thank you very much for that, Natasha. She's also got some rap songs she's going to share with me. Hey, you guys, if you want to take, one or two verses and make it into 4 or 5 verses, I'm willing to steal those from you. If anybody, in the music industry, they have the people that perform, but then they're backed up by all the composers. And so if you guys are willing to be composers, if you're willing to string Rob and Carmen and Natasha and who else? Now it's Chad, Brent, and maybe you can even borrow other people's verses, start keeping track, start keeping a spreadsheet or something like this, borrow people. If you guys can compose, I promise you, I will perform at the Color Festival. I will ask you to perform your own stuff, but if you're too shy or too experienced or unwilling, you can be the composer and I'll be the performer. Is it a deal? Okay. If you can just make, kind of string a few verses, we have to have, it's 4 or 5 verses to make something that we can unveil at a color festival, which incidentally is just 4 months away. The Spanish for Color Festival's right around the corner. We're already starting to get ready for it. I'll make a deal with you. I guarantee that that these will see the light of day. These will be performed in front of thousands of people, and I'll give you the first right to perform. But if you should be not willing to do that, I will perform it, or I will find someone to perform it. But let's take what we've started and run with it, shall we? Okay. Anyway, here's Brent. And Brent's poems are getting longer too as time goes on as well. You can't do enough prep to avoid danger at every step. A man can make a plan with a sword or supplies stored, but everything is controlled by the Lord. Rely on him. And rap is about the beat too. So you if your head should be bobbing a little bit. You can't do enough prep to avoid danger at every step. A man can make a plan with a sword or supplies stored, but everything is controlled by the Lord. Rely on him. Right? Okay. Now we go to the next here, who is Natasha, who by her own word uses AI. So let's see what Natasha/AI has come up with today. The leader of the elephants, noble and strong, faces a trial where currents throng. In Krishna's plan, the past revealed, a devotee's heart in water is healed. Beautiful, beautiful. The leader of elephants, noble and strong, faces a trial where currents throng. In Krishna's plan, the past revealed, a devotee's heart in waters healed. Yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful. Here's Carmen. Be humble, give respect, or you'll fumble sacred texts. When you grumble, you will tumble and defeat your intellect. Be humble, give respect, or you'll fumble sacred texts. When you grumble, you will tumble and defeat your intellect. I assume there's no AI here. So you have a very subtle, mind, Carmen. Yeah, there's a lot of subtlety in your verses. I appreciate that. Be humble, give respect, or you'll fumble sacred texts. When you grumble, you will tumble and defeat your intellect. That's the essence of what we're talking about. How to keep everything very fresh. Here's Brent again, a second verse. You can hear Krishna Lila every day until you become gray. It never gets old if you're sold in the pure gold of bhakti. Once again, you can hear Krishna Lila every day until you become gray. It never gets old if you're sold in the pure gold of bhakti. Here's something from Chad. Constant change and evolution, the fruits of a spiritual revolution. Constant change and evolution, the fruits of a spiritual revolution. Yeah, it requires a revolution in consciousness. Because material things, material mindset, beginning, middle, and end, it's fresh for a little while, and then after repetition, it gets stale. So constant change and evolution, the fruits of a spiritual revolution. Yes, the symptom that your heart is getting cleansed, you want to hear again and again and again. More from Brent. Start from scratch to attach to Krishna's lotus feet. Forget what you think you know to grow. Start from scratch to attach Krishna's. Forget what you think to know to grow. Exactly. Forget that. That was actually spoken by Lord Brahma. That's a paraphrase of a famous phrase by Lord Brahma. In fact, that Brahmananda Roy quoted in his conversation with Lord Chaitanya. Forget what you think you know to grow. There is no utility in approaching the Gita without humility. There's no utility in approaching the Gita without humility. Exactly. Also from Brent. Wow, I feel so enriched by all this poetry. Thank you all. Thank you all. And let's see if we can't collate it to to churn out a song that we can debut in March. We'll see. Krishna's in control. What have you got for us today, Rob, in addition to all this other juicy stuff?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
How do you go?
Unfortunately, this morning has been an extremely crazy morning trying to get my son out the door. I wasn't able to put down any takeaways for today. But it sounds to me like between Carmen and Natasha and Brent that they carried the way today for me since I was unable to. That was some amazing takeaways and little rhymes that they were able to put together. So inspired.
We've got Chad in addition also jumped into
Chad.
You started it all. So we'll give our pranams to the maestro here, the Robster.
Howdy, Bo. I'm glad everyone's getting involved because it makes it so much more fulfilling and rewarding to hear everyone else's takeaways as well.
Yeah, we just need a coordinator. We need somebody to collate all of this, bring it together, find threads, sew things together, tweak things here and there. Anyway, I'm just throwing out ideas. Thank you. It's been a very wonderful session. I feel surcharged with transcendence this Transcendental Tuesday, and I'll look forward to rejoining you once again tomorrow morning for Wisdom Wednesday. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare